Welcome to Permission to Shift, the show that helps you release limits, transform fear, and get into a life you're excited to live. Today's guest is Matthew Dix, the international best-selling author of 9 books, which have been translated into more than 25 languages worldwide. He has written a rock opera, 3 musicals, and numerous comic books for Double Take Comics. Matthew is a humor columnist and has also published for Reader's Digest, The Hartford Courant, Parents Magazine, The Huffington Post, and the Christian Science Monitor. He is a 50-time Moth Story Slam champion and 6-time Grand Slam champion. He has appeared on the stages of TED, The Colin McEnroe Show, and This American Life, among others. Matthew is the creator, producer, and co-host of Speak Up Storytelling, and is also the creator and co-host of the Boy vs. Girl podcast about gender and gender stereotypes. When not hunched over a computer screen, Matthew fills his days as an elementary school teacher, a storyteller, a speaking coach, a blogger, a wedding DJ, minister, life coach, and a lord of Sealand. He has also been teaching for 21 years and has died twice. It is with great pleasure that I welcome him to the show today. So welcome to Permission to Shift, Matt. It is so good to have you back again.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. So for those of you who haven't met Matt yet, he is just a powerhouse. And I'm beyond thrilled to have you here. But I would love for the people who haven't met you yet, parts of my audience who haven't seen you yet, can you give them a little bit of an idea, the shifts you made to get where you are now into storytelling and what you went through and how that came about?
Sure. A lot of the shift that I made to go into storytelling was, fortunately, I had friends who pushed me into uncomfortable situations. They sort of became aware that storytelling was a thing. They became aware of the Moth, the big international storytelling organization. They were listening to the podcast. They pointed me at it. They said things like, "You've had the worst life of anyone we know, so you should go and tell stories," which is not a nice thing to say about your friend. But it was one of those situations where I sort of said I would do it without any intention of doing it. I did not want to go to New York and tell stories to disaffected hipsters with side eye and man buns. That was not my goal in life. It didn't sound great to me, but I had made that terrible mistake of saying, sure, I'll do that someday. And, they didn't let up on me. And I am the kind of person who can't stand not doing the thing I said I would do. And so as uncomfortable as it was, as much as I didn't want to do it, I decided I'll go to New York and I'll do this thing. I've always sort of found that when I do something that I don't want to do, when I find that like zone in the world that makes me frightened or, makes me feel like I'm going to fail, I have discovered again and again and again that if I run to that zone, I charge into that fear, on the other side, it is always so much better. It's just the idea of standing on the diving board and that the thrill of going off into the air and hitting the water is going to be fantastic, but you have to be willing to make the leap. And I meet a lot of people who are unwilling to make the leap. People follow the path of least resistance. Complacency is a killer, and it is what people do because it's easy. And so I'm always just saying, do the hard thing. So in storytelling, I did the hard thing. I took a stage one night in front of a bunch of disaffected hipsters with side eye and man buns and told a story. I've always been a person who has spoken vulnerably about my life. I always believe in saying the things about myself that are the least pretty, the least favorable. I like to talk about my failures, my flaws, things like that. So that was natural for me. But standing on that stage was terrifying until the moment I started speaking into the microphone, and then it all went away. Just like diving off the diving board. Once you're in the air and you're heading to the water, it feels great. The moment I started speaking into the microphone, I remember thinking, oh, like this is exactly where I should be right now. And it was, it was a leap. And thankfully my wife was there as well. So when they called my name that night, for a moment, I didn't move. I realized nobody knows me. I can just sit here quietly. They'll eventually call a different name. But my wife was there. She kicked me under the table. She told me to get my ass on stage, and it worked out well. And and I fell in love with it. And so every time an opportunity was offered to me in terms of storytelling, I took that opportunity, and it has really paid off, thankfully. So I continue to run at things that I'm afraid of.
Let's talk about that a little bit because there are some school of thoughts that say that fear, yes, fine, charge into fear, but the also school of thoughts that say that's your intuition telling you this isn't the right move. How do you know the difference?
I don't think there's a difference. I don't think that intuition is telling you it's the wrong move. I do a lot of talking on the idea that we should say yes to everything. I know that there is a school of thought that says you should learn to say no, you have to focus, you have to not let people, impede on your creative processes.
Mm.
My philosophy, it's not even a philosophy, this is right. What I'm going to say is I
Oh, bring
just
it.
think you should say yes to everything, because a yes affords you the opportunity to take a step in a direction. It doesn't mean it's a permanent yes. It just means I'm going to take one foot through the door and see what this is like. I can always pull my foot back. You can turn a yes into a no very simply. It is really hard to turn a no into a yes later on. When you say no, what you do is you risk regret. You risk saying no, and then 3 years later going, oh, look at that. If I had said yes to that, where would I be today? So I always say, when someone offers you an opportunity, as ridiculous as it may sound, and I can give you a list of all the ridiculous opportunities that I have said yes to, that my intuition said don't do it, Matt. All of them, or just about all of them, have paid off. And the ones that didn't pay off, I took two steps through the door. I realized the terrain I was in and said, actually, this is a no now. But at least I knew it was a no in an informed way, as opposed to just arbitrarily assuming that that opportunity didn't fit me because of my intuition. So I don't buy the intuition.
So you've opened up the door to this one yourself. You got to tell me some of the experience you had that were ridiculous that then you were able to say no to,
Oh, ones that I eventually said no to?
or that you said yeah, both. Give us both. Give us some examples.
Sure. Well, one of the first ones I like to think about is, for the last 22 years, I've been a wedding DJ. And the idea that I became a wedding DJ was kind of ridiculous. My friend Benji, my best friend, called me one day while I was working on a paper for college. I was working on a on an analysis of the 14th century poet Anne Askew, and he called me and he said, "Do you want to be a wedding DJ?" Now, I didn't really know much about music at the time. I had attended exactly two weddings in my life. One of them was his, and he wasn't happy with his DJ, and he thought, you know what, we could do better than this guy. And we didn't own any equipment. We didn't understand the industry. I didn't understand music. I didn't want to be a wedding DJ, but
And
I
you're going to
said,
jump into a wedding.
yeah, I said, I'm going to finish the paper and then we'll talk about the business. And then 4 months later, we did our first wedding, and that was 22 years ago. Now, I don't do it very much anymore. I've sort of phased that part out of my life, but for a long period of time, I did it a lot. And the payoff has been extraordinary. Like, payoffs like when I took that stage that night in New York. One of the advantages I've always had from other people is I don't fear anything when I'm standing in front of people. And part of that is I spent 2 decades standing in front of 200 wedding guests at a time, speaking extemporaneously while most of them didn't want to hear me. You don't want to hear the DJ like telling you what to do. So I don't fear a crowd. I'm excellent on a microphone. Saying yes to Benji and that wedding DJ, I eventually DJ'd weddings of people who are now my best friends, people who I DJ'd their wedding. They continued to be my friend. And now they are some of the closest people I know, people I would have never met if I hadn't become a wedding DJ. There's no reason why I should have been a wedding DJ. There was no desire, no skill, no expertise, no inclination. But I just said, well, I'll say yes to him now. And then if we do a wedding and I decide that was terrible, that'll be the last wedding I ever do. And instead I said, wow, that wasn't that bad. That was pretty easy. And I get to hang out with my best friend. And then all of those rewards that came after it were extraordinary. So, even if it doesn't make any sense, I think you should at least say yes and give it a shot, to again, take a couple steps through the door. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. One of the ones that sort of wasn't for me was a comic book company called me. They had seen me telling stories on stage and they said, we'd like you to write comics for us. Now, I've never read comics. I'm not good at reading comics because I am not a visual person. I don't notice things very often. Like, I can't tell you what pants I'm wearing right now unless I look down. I've spent the whole day with my wife and she's in the other room right now. I can't tell you what she's wearing. I'm just not a visual person. So when I look at a comic book pane, I just read all the words. I don't see the pictures, and then I don't know what the hell's going on. So they called me and said, "Would you like to write comic books?" And I thought, well, I've never really enjoyed comic books. I can't really read comic books. I don't understand how they work, but yes, I'll give it a try. I ended up writing 3 comic books with them. At the end of that 3 comic book process, I said, you know what? It's just not for me. I said, it's a lot of work. You have to fix a lot of what I'm doing. I recognize that this is not an area of skill and expertise for me. So thank you for the opportunity. And now I'm going to step away. Now, I stepped away from that opportunity 6 years ago. This year, that same person who owns a comic book company called me back and said, we now have film rights to some of these comic book properties. Would you like to write a screenplay for one of the comic books since you don't want to write comic books for us anymore? And I said, yes. So even that yes, that became a no, eventually opened up a new door. Whereas if I had just said, no, I don't like comic books, I'm not going to write them, I would never have the opportunities I have right now to write films based upon IP that already exists, which is a much more likely opportunity in terms of making a film. So just say yes.
Congratulations first. That's pretty outstanding.
Well, nothing's
When
happened yet. All my books are optioned for film, and nothing ever happens. So, a film is 9,000 miles down the road, but it's an opportunity. I like to think I have lots of pans on the fire, and one of them eventually will boil. So I have a new pan on the fire. That's really all I have. But it's an opportunity that I would not have. My greatest fear is you're 100, you're lying on your deathbed, and you're thinking about all the times you said no and all the doors that you allowed to be closed without walking through them. Does the 100-year-old version of yourself want you to say yes? Or does the 100-year-old version of yourself want to say, you know what? Sometimes your intuition is telling you to say no, and you should just say no. No, that is not what the 100-year-old version of you is saying. They are saying life was too short. You didn't do enough. You didn't say yes enough. Intuition isn't a thing. Open the doors, look inside, see what the room looks like, and then decide if it's something for you or not.
Or maybe you're misreading your intuition. That is also possible.
Or maybe intuition isn't really a thing, you know? Maybe it's just sort of it's like a mystical belief that people have that they believe guide them in some way that isn't realistic, and perhaps is an excuse for not doing things that are frightening or hard, or scary, or unknown. I'm not going to go in that cave because my intuition says there might be something bad in there, right? Where, it could be a pile of gold, but your intuition said don't go in. Why? Because it was dark, right? And because it was scary. I think you should just charge forward into the unknown and into the fear and see what happens.
Let's talk about the excuses, because you're saying people can use intuition as an excuse. I think people can use anything as an excuse, really. But what are the big ones that you're hearing that people use and actually create their stories around? Like they're not good, the internal ones.
Right. Well, time is always an interesting one for me. People just say they don't have time. And I work with a lot of people in terms of productivity and efficiency. And I find it very interesting how people view time and then allow that to be an excuse for them in terms of getting things done. So I was meeting with a woman at a McDonald's restaurant. She wanted to ask me some questions about publishing, and I'm always willing to give someone an hour of my time if they want to become a creative person. So I said, meet me at the McDonald's. She thought it was weird. Why am I meeting in a fast food restaurant? That's the place that I feel very comfortable. I like plastic chairs and refilled Diet Coke, and I like a lot of noise. That's where I like to write. So we were sitting there, and she sat down and she started to ask me questions about publishing. And I sat quietly and I waited for the question that I wanted to ask, the most important question. So she asked me about film rights and foreign rights and agents and editors. And then finally, there was a moment where I could say something. And I said, so how is the book coming? And she said, oh, well, I haven't started it yet. And I said, why haven't you started it? And she said, well, I'm waiting for the right moment to have time. She said, what I'm hoping to do is to take a sabbatical from my job for 6 months, and then I'm going to write the book, but I want to be as informed as possible. And I said to her, so you were about 7 minutes late today. And she started to apologize. And I said, no, that's not the point. And I said, I told you to come to a McDonald's on a highway. You're allowed to be 7 minutes late. I said, but what do you think I was doing in those 7 minutes that I was waiting for you? And she said, I don't know. I said, I was writing. And I turned my computer screen. And I said, while you were 7 minutes late, I wrote 13 sentences. Right. And she said, well, you can do that because you already started your book. I'm not going to start my book, in 7 minutes. And I said, that's exactly what I do. If you want to be a writer, if you want to be a creator or a maker of something in the world, a creator of a garden or a book or a piece of sculpture or a new business. If you actually want that, every single minute, you can't wait to get back to it. And so often people think that the only way you can do something is if the 1 minute is attached to 59 more. Like people feel like they can only work if they have an hour or if they only have 3 hours. Or I'm told I can only work in a coffee shop and I really need a latte and smooth jazz. I have actually been told that. And I told that person, do you know that there were men in the trenches during World War I in Germany as they were being attacked with gas and they had masks on? They were scribbling on paper trying to write things while their lives were threatened. Thank God they didn't need a Starbucks and smooth jazz to do some of the work that they did. Right? That's just another excuse. Like the excuse is often, I need everything to be perfect before I can be creative. And what happens typically then is you just die. You wait for the moment to be perfectly right, and then you're 100 and you realize I did nothing. So kills me. It kills me when people do that, but I think it happens all the time.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And the environment has to be right. And there was an article I read about makers versus manager schedule. Have you heard this one?
No.
Maker schedule is you need the full hour, you need bigger chunks of time, or you actually can't get into it because you don't see the value in it. And manager schedule are people who are able to back to back to back to back micro schedule things. And I love what you're saying because it's a challenge that says it's not necessarily because you're a maker or a manager, it's what you're choosing to believe about your time. That's the kicker.
Yeah. Yeah. It's what you're choosing to believe about your time. And I think it's taking the path of least resistance. I think it's hard to write. There are days when, even though I love to write, it's hard. And I look and I see that I have 13 minutes. It's easy for me to say, well, what am I going to get done in 13 minutes? I'm not going to work on this right now. It's hard to say, well, I've got 13 minutes. I wrote 2 paragraphs this morning. I'm sure they need a lot of editing already. Why don't I use the next 13 minutes to edit those 2 paragraphs? A novel is, let's say 100,000 words. If I can write 5 of those words, I am closer to the end than I was before. But for some reason, people see time in increments of hours, 2 hours. Sometimes I see them in days. I have author friends who rent hotel rooms to get away from their family so they can work over the weekends in a hotel, which sounds lovely. But, there's also the opportunity of, well, I'm just going to go hide in a closet, or I'm going to go outside right now and write on the porch, right? Or I know someone who sits in her car and writes because that's the place where she can hide from her family. Those are the people who actually make things, not the ones that need smooth jazz and Starbucks and a hotel room and they can only write 3 days out of the month because those are the 3 days they get away from everyone. You know, Van Gogh, he did his best work while he was in a sanitarium surrounded by insane people because they thought he was insane. He wasn't like, well, I'm going to wait until I get out of the insane asylum to do my painting, right? He did Starry Night in an insane asylum while being treated for his insanity. Can you imagine what would have happened if he was waiting for the perfect moment to create what he created? It's just an easy way to avoid doing the hard thing.
Do you think people get attached more to the idea, the romance of doing the thing than actually doing the thing?
100%. Yes.
And how do you get them out of it?
I don't know if you can. Everyone, like for writing, for example, with what I do, everyone wants to have written. No one actually wants to do the writing. And when they imagine writers, what they often think is people who work from 10 a.m. till about 1 p.m. and then they take a lunch and then they maybe read a book in the afternoon and that's the end of their day. And that would be lovely if someone on the internet wants to fund my life and become a patron for me so that I can do the things I want to do and the times I want to do them. That would be great. So, get in touch with me if you want to pay all my bills. That would be great. Otherwise, though, I have to write in the cracks of my life, which most people have to do. If you're an entrepreneur, I'm building a business right now. When I'm building a business with a couple other guys, we do it in the cracks of my life. Yesterday, I was sitting in my car, staring at a spreadsheet on my phone while my children were in swimming lessons, talking to my two business partners and having a business meeting in my car. It was 90 degrees. I was sweating like a pig, staring at my phone, but I was working in the cracks of my life. It was the moment when the three of us could get together and have a business conversation. And it worked out fine. I got out of the car, I swam, everything was good. But I don't wait for the perfect moment. I grab every second that I have. So I think it's hard to get people to, I think it's hard to get people to do the hard thing. I just think that's a very challenging thing. Part of me is really happy about that. I tell my children all the time, I say, listen, guys, I say, you don't have to try that hard to be great because nobody's trying that hard, you know? And when I look in the world, I kind of think that, you know, I think when you survey most people in the world, most of their lives are, I go to a job that I did not choose, but kind of chose me. And I do that job until 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And then I come home and I eat a meal with my family if I have a family. And then I transition from mealtime to the television for 2 to 3 hours. And then I go to bed. And I repeat that, waiting for the weekend to come when I can perhaps sleep in a little later, maybe drink a little more, go out to dinner on a Saturday night. And that is the life that they lead. That is not the life they wanted to lead when they were 12 or 16 or even 20, right? And because you're trapped in that life doesn't mean it has to be your life. I have a job. I'm a school teacher. I love that job. I adore it, but I do 19 other things, and I still have time to play golf and play with my children and spend quality time with my wife. We just had a sailing lesson. We just spent 2 hours together on a sailboat learning how to sail, which was something she was very afraid of because she believes in running to the fear as well. So I have the time to do these things, but I just choose to not follow the path of least resistance. I think most people do. And the good thing about it is creative people, there's lots of space for us because there's not as many of us.
Ooh, that is fantastic. So what would you recommend to people? So I'm a creative person and what you said just resonates, right? Or someone listening, this resonates with me. How do I approach resistance and recreate the stories in my head so that I can run into the fear willingly and not talk myself out of it?
This is not going to sound like the nicest thing, or it's not going to make me sound like the nicest person in the world. But one of the best stories that I tell myself all the time when I want to run into the fear or do the hard thing, apply myself in a way other people are not willing to apply themselves, is I just try to acknowledge to myself, truly in my heart and my mind, that what I'm doing is so much more than the people around me. And as a result of that, I am going to succeed at a higher level, achieve greater things, have a life that is more rich and valuable than the person next to me. It's sort of the idea that I just look around and I go, well, if I just do the really hard thing today, I'm going to be better than all of these people. And that is a really good feeling. There's a really nice feeling to putting your head down on the pillow at the end of the night and going, well, I got up at 4 this morning and I worked on a book for 2 hours. And then I met my buddy at the golf course for an hour and a half, and we played golf, kind of running because we only had an hour and a half, but that was fine. And then I brought my kids to camp, and then I had a sailing lesson with my wife. And we got back from the sailing lesson, and I spoke to someone on the internet about creativity and productivity. And as soon as I'm done speaking to that person, I'm going to go chat with a bunch of elderly people on how to tell stories better from their past. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to speak to my therapist for half an hour about PTSD. And then I'm going to have dinner with my family. And then probably I'm going to read Harry Potter to my children. They're going to go to bed. And my wife and I are going to stare at each other and say, is tonight the night we see a movie? Are you going to play the ukulele for me while I do some more writing? Are we going to record a podcast together? And then I'm going to put my head on the bed, on the pillow, and I'm going to look back on my day and go, I crushed it. And I look around and I go, nobody crushed it like me today. That's a great feeling to have. So the story that you can kind of tell yourself is that, this sounds terrible, is I'm just doing so much better than all of you. And that feels really good. So there's lots of ways to do it, but I do believe that is a very incentivizing thing for people to just acknowledge you're doing an amazing thing and the people around you are not necessarily doing equally amazing things.
You talk in there about quite a bit actually about your relationships with your kids, your relationships with your wife. Now, I know you're a storyteller, and we were talking about this just before we came on live here. And we were talking about the moments that matter and connecting to people. And I know I've had this conversation with you before, but for the people who haven't heard you talk about this, I think it's really important. So, can you fill us in a little bit about how you use your stories to create the relationships with your wife that wants to do a podcast with you? Because that's pretty phenomenal, by the way.
Yeah, well, we enjoy doing that together. It's a labor of love. We've been doing it for a while, and it's great. The I guess I mean there's a million answers to the question you just asked. I'll tell you this, the game 3-2-1. I've played it with you before, right? A storytelling game. I
Mm,
brought my kids to camp today. We got in the car. My son said, "Let's play 3-2-1 all the way to camp." And boy, was that great. So 3-2-1 is a game where you get three random objects. You're assigned those objects as prompts. You have to choose one of those objects and tell a true story about that object. You have up to 2 minutes to tell that story, and you have a minute to prepare it. So I said, "Sure, Charlie, let's play 3-2-1." I gave him three words. The word he chose was stick. I gave him the word stick. And he said, "Is it okay if it's something that happened yesterday?" And I said, "Of course, you know that." So he said, "So this boy at camp found this amazing stick. It was long and it was flat and it was perfect. It was the God stick," he told me. He said, "It was the stick I had to have." So he asked the boy for the stick, and the boy said, "I'll never give you the stick." So Charlie said he went out into the woods and he collected like 100 sticks, hoping that he could find the right stick to trade for the God stick. And so he says an hour, but in little boys' heads, it was probably 15 minutes because that feels like an hour to him. He went out and he collected all these sticks. He laid them all out on the grass and he said to the boy, "You can have any one of my sticks or any combination of my sticks for the God stick." And the boy looked carefully at all the sticks and said, "No, I'm keeping the God stick." So then Charlie had to bring all the other sticks back to the woods. And he said, "And so I was sad for a little while. And then something amazing happened, Dad. That boy went home and he wasn't allowed to bring the God stick with him. So for the last hour of camp, I got the God stick and I hid it so I can have it again today." And then he said, "Thank you." Now, I asked Charlie yesterday how camp went, and he said it was great. I played tennis, I played basketball, I swam, I ate lunch with my friends. And I said, "That sounds great." I would have never known this whole stick adventure if we had not played 3-2-1 and we had gone to camp and had the time in the car to share that story, right? And I just feel so more connected to my son as a result. Like I got a piece of his interior life that I would have never had if we didn't play that game. And then he gave me a word and I told him a story about when I was 16 that I had never told him before, that involved me driving a car across a church lawn and knocking down a sign, right? And it was a moment that happened to me. He gave me the word sign, and suddenly I thought, "Oh, I never told him the time I accidentally drove across the church lawn and knocked down a sign and lost a friendship because of it." Right. So I told them that story. And then my daughter, who was reading, jumped in and started asking me a million questions. And now she knows a little bit more about me as a 16-year-old. It's just beautiful. That's what happens when you tell stories. When you're willing to open up and start to share parts of your life, you get closer to people, you get connected to people. As a parent, I have the opportunity to teach my kids things. So I talked about how a terrible decision I made driving across a church lawn and knocking down a sign cost me a friendship. My friend decided Matt is not the kind of kid he used to be. He likes to do bad things, which was true. I don't want to be friends with him anymore. And my daughter said, "Oh, that's kind of like what happened to me and my friend in elementary school." And I said, "Actually, it's exactly what happened. She got a phone. Her whole life became about a phone. My daughter, who's 12, still doesn't have a phone, doesn't want a phone actually, and just decided that you and your phone life, you and your texting life, you and your drama life is not going to fit with me anymore." Right. And I said, "Yes, Clara, that's exactly what happened." And then Charlie started talking about a kid that he has as a friend that sometimes is mean to other people. So he's not sure if he still wants to have that kid as his friend, and asked if it's okay to like let go of a friend. And I said, well, it was okay for David to let go of me when I drove across the church lawn, right? All of that happens because
Oh,
Charlie says, let's play 3, 2, 1.
wow. Have you done this game in a corporate setting?
Yes, many times. Yeah.
How does it go? Do people really open up or?
Yeah, they do. The reasons we do it is many. One of them is I just want people to practice the skills that I teach. So if I teach you storytelling skills, ideally you shouldn't have to sort of prep every story. You don't want to go to a dinner party going, okay, I got to get my 3 stories ready before I go to my dinner party. That would be weird. But if we practice telling
People do that.
stories, yeah, well, that's sad. If I give them something like 3, 2, 1, they get to use the strategies right there at the moment because it's an unprepared story. It's an instantly prompted story. So
Hmm.
in corporate environments, it gives a chance for practice. It also gives a chance for remarkable connection. One of my favorite moments was I was sitting in a boardroom, big table, maybe 20 people, all sort of executives. I was working with this company, and we played 3, 2, 1. And one of the women told a story about playing tennis. It was a tennis match she had just had like 2 weeks before, and she told about this difficult match she had. When she finished telling the story, a woman on the other side of the table said, "You play tennis? I didn't know you played tennis. I play tennis too." And I said, "How long have the two of you worked together?" They were like, 20 years. We had no idea we played tennis. It's because I was in an environment where storytelling was not something that was prized. Sharing your personal life at that moment in that company was not something people did. And my goal was to get people to open up. If you want your team to be closer together, to bond, to believe in each other, to trust each other, one of the best ways is to get to know each other in a deep and meaningful way. Even if it's just now those two women can go and play tennis. And I can see how playing tennis with a coworker is going to make you much closer to that coworker, create an ally in the business, bring people into a circle. All of that can happen through storytelling and a million other things. But yeah, we play that game. We actually have, or I have companies that I've worked with that they've instilled 3, 2, 1 as the opening to every meeting. So at the beginning of every meeting, they play 3, 2, 1 with somebody, and someone gets a chance to share something of their life. It's great because they have an opportunity to share something with other people. But there's a lot of people in this world, and I'll say it's women more than men, who are not afforded the space to speak, or don't believe they are afforded the space to speak because of the climate and the people around them. And so when you create a space where everyone agrees to shut the hell up and allow that person to say something meaningful and something important and something of themselves, and everyone's going to agree that that is acceptable, I think that's really important. For someone like me, a white, straight American man, I have no problem finding places to speak. And frankly, I have no problem asserting my voice into those spaces. It is not something I'm ever worried that someone's going to push back on me. And I acknowledge that. So I think we need to do what I think people like, frankly, people who look like me need to do, is to create an opportunity for the people who often don't feel like they can speak or are not afforded the opportunity to speak. We need to shut up and give those people a chance to do these things too. So maybe they will become as assertive as I am someday, hopefully, and that would be a beautiful thing. But until you can punch through white privilege, white male heterosexual privilege, I think there has to be a place for us to create opportunities for other people. And so that's why we play 3, 2, 1 in lots of the companies, because that gives everyone a chance every now and again to stand up and share something personal. And I just, the value there it's unimaginable.
And I love too that by using the random objects, you're not putting someone on the spot of what do I say? Because it's so random.
Yeah. And the expectations are lowered because it's not like come to the meeting and tell us an interesting story.
Yes.
It's we're going to throw 3 things at you, and we just want you to tell us something related to your own life involving one of those 3 objects. And so there's no expectation that you're going to be magnificent. Like the best storytellers in the world playing 3, 2, 1 don't sound that good. The reason that's it's three objects because you can always find something to say with three, unless you're getting three terrible words from people who don't like you. But even then, you can fight through it. You only have 2 minutes to speak. And the reason for that is we know that story is coming out of you very quickly. If you speak longer than 2 minutes, it's probably not going to be very good at that point. To carry more than 2 minutes unprepared is a hard thing to do. So don't do it. And the one is important, which is you only get 1 minute to think about it. And we all acknowledge you only had 1 minute to think about it. We give you just enough time to kind of pull in the memories enough to say stuff, but to not say it in a super crafty way. And that's the expectation. When you lower those expectations for people, it makes it easier for them to share because performance does not matter anymore. For kids, it's enormous. Kids love 3-2-1 because they spend their whole lives, every single time they're told to write something, speak something, say something, they're assessed. They don't get to ever write something without a teacher making a comment or assigning a grade or handing a rubric. So when I say we're going to play 3-2-1 and they say, well, what happens at the end of it? I said, we all applaud and you sit your ass down so somebody else can talk, right? There's not going to be any, there's no grade, there's nothing. It's just an opportunity to share in an unassessed way. Children love that. Children from 6 to 16 love it. All the kids I work with, they beg me to play 3-2-1. In the same way Charlie asked me to play 3-2-1 in the car today. He will always play 3-2-1. He loves it. He loves both sides of it too. He loves sharing a story. He loves hearing a story. He begged his sister to play today. His sister, who he fights with all the time, he said, please play. I want to hear you say something. So it's so good. It's all good.
And what do you do with people who, especially people who are afraid to share? Because those people are in every room and their stories matter. And often they're the voices that don't get heard.
Yeah, it's tough. Well, when you create a culture of storytelling, when you create a culture of sharing, eventually it just becomes the norm. In the same way, if you've ever been like in a corporate setting and someone walks in with a plate of cookies and you all stare at the cookies and someone has to take the first cookie, and after someone takes the first cookie, everyone else will take the cookie. Once people start telling stories in these environments and you start to hear them telling stories about fairly ordinary moments in people's lives, uncrafted, that is a much better way to get the people who are less willing to begin speaking. It becomes a norm. Once one person eats the cookie, everyone will eat the cookie. So that is one really good way to do it, is to just get people to do it regularly, make it part of the culture. This is a thing that we do. We just tell stories. They don't have to sound good. They don't even have to be earth shattering. There has to be just something related to this object or the other. I have lots of other games that we play in these environments that will, once again, just give people an opportunity to tell a story in an impromptu, way based upon some random idea that they are offered. So that's one good way to do it. The other way is to just, I just kind of bully people a little bit to do it. I just take them aside and I say things to them like, you're not special. Everyone's afraid. You sit there and you think that you're somehow different, that like you're extra shy or you're extra afraid, and I always say, you're not special. You're just like everybody else. Trust me. She was afraid and he was afraid and she is still afraid and you are afraid. We are all the same. So just go do the thing that everyone else is doing. I promise it's going to be fine. Go jump off that diving board and I'll be here to catch you. Like if you land in the water and you can't come up, I'll pull you up, And a lot of times I'll say things like, no matter what you say, I am going to tell everyone you did a great job. And I'm going to pull something out of your story that you actually did well. And I will mention that thing and nothing else. I will only tell people something that you did beautifully. And then you will sit and no one else will speak about it, except they will enjoy the moment. And that will help a lot too. But it is hard. And it's gendered to a great degree. I spend an enormous amount of time trying to convince women that some of the things that have happened in their lives are worth telling, while simultaneously telling men that not every single thing that has ever happened in your life is worth telling and pushing them to the middle. Not always the case, but it is a very gendered situation. Yeah, it kills me. It breaks my heart when someone doesn't know they have a story to tell.
And this is actually extremely powerful what you're saying right now. And you're talking about inclusion and getting over bias that we have for ourselves, our weird beliefs that what we have to say doesn't matter. So for anyone who's watching right now, how do they, because you facilitate, you've mentioned that you facilitate these things. Can you tell us a bit more about the services you offer for corporate and for schools or children or organizations, groups?
Yeah, I mean it sort of varies depending on the organization. So like I can just give you examples of what I'm doing right now. In corporate work, I tend to work with marketing teams, advertising teams,
Hmm.
CEOs who have to do speeches and things. The interesting thing that happens with my corporate work is I often get assigned to a marketing team and I help them and I teach them how to infuse storytelling into their work. But what I'm always pushing them to do, and what they eventually realize is important, is I'm always pushing them to tell me their own stories. If you can tell a good story about your own life, you can take those same skills and apply them to marketing. And the beauty of learning to tell your own stories is you get to practice. If I teach you how to make your deck more story worthy, infuse more story into it, you can't go home and like pull out another deck and practice. No one's going to practice another marketing plan, but you can practice storytelling with your own personal content and gain like all those other benefits to it. So I'm always telling my marketers, the CEOs, the advertisers, let me teach you how to tell a personal story. And then you're going to go home and teach another person to tell another personal story. And you're going to start building up these personal stories. And you're going to discover that every single thing I tell you when it comes to marketing, when it comes to advertising, when it comes to delivering a speech, inspiring employees, all of those things that I help people do, I learned it through personal storytelling. All I'm doing is taking the thing that I know about telling my own stories and applying it to your deck or to your advertising campaign or to the speech you're trying to give to your hospital workers. It all comes from there. So often it ends up me teaching these people personal storytelling and then helping them with marketing and advertising. And I work with people who want to connect with their employees better. I work with a
Mm-hmm.
factory owner. He wants to go on the floor and inspire and connect with his employees. And it's so interesting because the way we do it is through personal storytelling. So this guy has really figured it out. He comes to me once a month with his homework for life. We go through it and we pick out 3 things that are worth telling stories about. And he crafts these stories up with me. And then the thing that I haven't figured out how to teach them yet. They have such a hard time seeing a story and understanding how they can then apply it to their business. As soon as I show them how to apply it to their business, they go, "Oh my God, why didn't I see that?" But every single time, that's what they say to me. "Oh my God, why didn't I see that?" So, some guy is telling me a story about how his son struck out to lose the Little League game. But even though he struck out to lose the Little League game, he was still happy that he had the opportunity to play. And he was 5 minutes later, he was laughing with his friends and he was moving on. Right. And he just found the strength of his son to lose the game, the championship game. He lost it for his team. And yet 5 minutes later, he's happy again. And he said, "How am I going to use that story?" And I said, "Well, do you have a sales team ever fail to get the sale?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "What happens to your sales team?" He says, "They're devastated." I said, "Do you not see it yet?" He still didn't see it. I said, "Do you not see how you could tell the story about how your son lost a championship game and 5 minutes later was already smiling and ready to go on to the next thing? Could you not do the same thing for your sales team? Say, listen, I want you to be like my son. If you lose the contract or the account, like be reflective, figure out why you lost it, but then move on with enthusiasm and vigor and a newfound spirit for the next one." Like, and then he went, "Oh my God, why didn't I see that?" But that's what I can help people do. So in the corporate world, that's what I do. But I work with priests and ministers and rabbis so that they can fuse storytelling into their sermons and the work they do with people. I work with Santa Clauses because they figured out that if they can tell a good 1 minute or 2 minute story to the kid on their lap, that kid's more likely to smile, which means the photograph's going to happen quicker at the mall. And they're going to get more kids on their lap over the course of that hour, which means they get more business within the hour, right? Smart, right?
Wow, that is capitalist Santa at his best.
Yeah, but it makes sense, right? You
It
know,
does.
I've worked with Native Americans. I work with the Mohawk tribe in Canada. They're learning the Mohawk language for the first time, the original language, but they've discovered they have nothing interesting to say. So they had me come up to teach them storytelling so that they could practice this newfound language that they have by telling interesting stories, so people will actually want to listen to the things they have to say. I work with companies on simple things like when a customer calls you what do you say on the phone to the customer, right? Because that's an opportunity to tell a story or to be ready to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the companies I was working with, they told me it depends on who answers the phone. And I said, well, that is not the right answer, right? You need to have like a script. You need to have some stories. You need to have like a plan when someone calls so that as the customer, I have a story about your company almost immediately. And the way that I called my handyman today is a company called Mr. Handyman. I have 4 things that need to be fixed in my house because I can fix nothing, literally nothing. The toilet paper holder in my bathroom is broken and it needs to be replaced. I can't even imagine how a handyman fixes that. But I called Mr. Handyman and the woman on the phone told me a story. It was great. She said, oh, well, we're going to send Peter over there. The last time Peter had a job like this, she told me a story and I thought I would hire this lady in a second. I would steal her from Mr. Handyman and I'd put her into whatever corporate marketing or advertising business I have, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I help companies figure out how to, fix that level of communication. I work with teachers all the time. Teachers don't understand the value of storytelling and the value of personal storytelling. You know, the way that I share my life with my students, the first story I tell on the first day of school every single year is the story of how at the 6th grade pool party at the end of the year at one of my classmates' houses, I went off the diving board and my bathing suit wasn't tied. I hadn't tied yeah. So I hit the water and I left my bathing suit behind, which means I was in the pool naked, surrounded by my classmates, coming to the surface thinking, please let nobody notice. Please let nobody notice. And everyone saw me. And I tell my students that story on the very first day of school. One year, a father said, why are you telling my daughter stories about you being naked in swimming pools? And I said, well, here's what happens. I teach 5th grade, which means more than half of the girls in my class get their first period over the course of their 5th grade school year. And this year, just this past year, 3 of those girls got their first period in my class while I was teaching. 3 of them came to me and told me that they had their first period. I'm an elementary school teacher. I am surrounded by women at all times. There is always a female teacher within grasp, right? And 3 of my students, and over the years, dozens of my female students have come to me and said, Mr. Dix, I just had my first period. And I always think, why are you telling me? I don't use the products that you require. I don't know how to use the products you require. I've never had a period myself. I am so unhelpful in this situation for you. And there's a lady teacher there, and there's a lady teacher there, right? The reason they come to me though is because on the first day of school, I talk about being embarrassed in front of my classmates. I talk about being uncomfortable and being uncertain. And I do that all year long. I tell them about every stupid thing I've ever done. I constantly tell them those stories so that they feel like they can come to me when they have something they need to share. So when I tell stories about being homeless, which I was at a period in my life, that was the year that a girl came to me and told me she was living in the car with her mother and they were afraid to tell anyone. And when I tell students that I was in jail before, that's when the boy comes to me and says, my father's in prison, but I was afraid to tell anyone in school. Can you tell me what prison's like? And I say, I can't because I was in jail, not prison, but it's different. But the boy had someone to talk to about it. Like suddenly the boy said, oh, I can go talk about my dad in prison to that teacher because he shared something about being in jail before. And I do it all year long. And the result is I'm not the best teacher in the world in terms of lesson planning. The woman who teaches across from me is brilliant. Like she designs the best lessons. I just steal them from her all the time and she knows it. But I'm very effective as a teacher. And the only reason I am good as a teacher is because I make deep and meaningful connections with my students. So they are willing to run through walls for me. So when I say it's time to learn long division, and it really sucks, guys, but you have to learn it because they feel connected to me, because they know I love them from the things that I say and the stories that I tell. They are willing to learn long division, even with my imperfect lesson, and they will succeed because they believe in me and I believe in them. And we have that, that communal trust that we establish. So I help teachers understand that because so often teachers are, I know teachers who won't even tell the kids if they're married or not, or, whether they have children or not. They feel like, well, this is my professional life and this is my personal life, right? And I say, not with teaching. Like, not with teaching. Those kids, you spend more time with those children than the parents spend with those children over the course of a weekday. How can you not open your heart to them? So wherever you're doing, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, storytelling can help you. I have yet to find a business, an occupation, a profession, a person for whom storytelling will not make your job, your life, your experiences better.
Right. And in the corporate world, your teams, I can't imagine that it would be any difference for corporations and their teams, and not even just sales, the senior corporate staff, all of them.
Yeah, when you're willing to share. I once worked with the CEO of a very large hospital. She had to speak to 3,000 of her employees, and we were working on her talk together. And her husband went through her hospital to have knee surgery, and the hospital botched the knee surgery, and it was a really bad situation. It eventually turned out fine, but the hospital, the surgeons, they screwed up the CEO's husband's knee surgery. And I said, that's the story you have to tell. And she said, why would I tell that story? And I said, well, first of all, we all know your hospital screws up because it's a hospital and it's human beings. We don't think you're error free. So don't think that like you're gliding through life that, with the impression that this hospital is perfection. So sharing a mistake is nothing surprising. But if you stand on stage and you talk about your husband's botched knee surgery, you're going to be acknowledging to everyone some vulnerability. You're going to be sharing something deep and personal. And as long as you're not sharing it in a angry, blaming way, but in a, I love my husband and I know my employees, my doctors and my nurses did the absolute best they could, but I also know that these things happen sometimes. That's going to be a powerful story to tell. And so she did. And she called me the next day and said, I've never had so many people stop me from the car to my office to tell me either they love the story or to share something from their life as a result, which is the beautiful thing of storytelling. If you tell someone a story, they just feel like, oh, now I can share something with you. And so I am the bearer of more secrets than you could ever begin to imagine. People, strangers, tell me stuff all the time. People I've never met who like hear me on the radio or follow our podcast, they'll see me or they'll email me. I get emails all the time from people sharing these like deeply personal things, or I'll step off a stage. Right before the pandemic, I stepped off the stage after telling a story, just a vulnerable story about, I think it was the story about when my daughter Clara was 3. I put her to bed for the first time alone because my wife went out with friends after giving birth. So I was home alone with my daughter for the first time, put her to bed, felt great about it. I'm a killer. I'm killing it. I'm the best father in the world. Came downstairs. I wrote a chapter of a book and I was like, I just wrote a whole chapter of my book. I'm amazing. I deserve a reward. So I decided to go to 7-Eleven and get myself a Diet Coke. And I drove to 7-Eleven and got myself a Diet Coke and left my infant daughter home alone, not intentionally, but because I forgot she existed. I just forgot for a moment that I was a father and that there was a girl upstairs, a tiny little baby that I was responsible for. I left the house. It wasn't until I saw the sign for 7-Eleven that I went, oh my God, I'm a father. And I turned around and came home, right? That's actually a very common thing for parents to have happen to them, especially early on. It doesn't happen now. I don't forget that I'm a father now. There's crap all over my house. But when you first have that baby, sometimes you're like, oh, that's right. There's another person in this house. It just left my mind. So I shared that story, vulnerability. I step off the stage, a woman runs up to me, doesn't tell me her name, just grabs me. People touch me all the time because as soon as you feel like you know me, like men just always stroke my forearm for some reason. They're always like touching me while they're talking to me. My wife, she's like, man, he's like petting you. I'm like, I know. Or they squeeze my forearm all the time, like they're holding on to me. So she comes up and she grabs me, she pulls me in close, and she says to me, every time I go into someone's house, even my own mother's house, I have to steal something. And then she pulls me in really close and she whisper yells at me and she says, I've never told anyone that before. Now, this is like a 40-year-old lady with mental illness, kleptomania, right? She steals from her own mother. She's gone 40 years without telling anyone. And then a man on stage told a story that contained vulnerability. He opened his heart and admitted to flaw and failure, stepped off the stage. And in her mind, she said, that's the man who I have to tell my secret to. I've had 5 women in my life tell me about their miscarriages after I stepped off the stage. And in all 5 cases, I was the first and only person they'd ever spoken to about their miscarriage. First time it happened, I thought it was crazy. I called my wife who had a miscarriage and she said, it's not crazy at all. You stood on stage, you were vulnerable, you made yourself open to someone. When you have a miscarriage, even though you're not supposed to blame yourself, you can't help but blame yourself. She said, oftentimes with women, they haven't even told anyone that they're pregnant yet. and now they've had a miscarriage. So how do you tell your friend, I was pregnant, but now I'm not? That's a hard thing to do. She said, you made yourself available. And that worked. I gave a talk in a high school once. A boy came up to me, like a 16 or 17-year-old boy. Right after the talk was done, he came up again, he grabbed me, he pulled me over, and he said, I can't pee in toilets. I have to pee in the corner of the bathroom. And then he ran away. Now, as a teacher, I can tell you that's actually a thing for some kids. Boys, for some reason, something goes on in their brain that says pee in the corner, don't pee in the toilet. It's a really rotten thing because the bathroom stinks and you have to track down that person, and it's never fun. This boy has had this problem, and he heard me tell a bunch of vulnerable stories on stage, and he decided, that guy I'm going to tell my secret to. Now, thankfully, I saw him, I identified him. The teacher next to me, I said, who's that boy? And then we connected that boy to the school psychologist. But if we don't, as teachers or as human beings, share our lives, share our flaws, share our failures, share our truth with other human beings, what happens is we silence other people. The people that want to speak, that can't find the space to speak, if we are not brave enough to do it, then they can't find sort of that opportunity to step into a space and share with you. So there's so much value in telling stories, in addition to all the ones we've talked about. It's just that idea that you're going to just give other people an opportunity to share things that they would not have shared otherwise.
Matthew, this has been amazing. Before we wrap it up, can you please tell us about your podcast, how to reach you on the website? I'm going to be dropping the links down, either up or down, depending on social media, wherever this is posted. So can you fill us in quickly on those?
Sure. Well, you can find me at matthewdix.com, and basically everything is there. My podcast that I do with my wife, it's called Speak Up Storytelling. You can just find that wherever you find podcasts. We take a story that was told in one of our live shows, and we air that story, and then we sort of take that story apart and talk about what's going well and what needed to be improved. I do a section on homework for life every week so that I can reinforce that with people and teach them how to find ideas for stories. And it's my wife and I. She's delightful, and I am an unlikable person who tells a good story. So together it works really wonderfully.
I think you're incredibly likable,
You're very
as I'm
kind.
sure do all of these
No, my
fantastic
wife
people.
would she would say he is kind of slightly unlikable but tells a good story. I mean, there are parts of me that are do you remember the part where I was saying one of my motivations is knowing that I'm better than other people? That's not really the most likable aspect of a human being.
I think it's honest, and I think there's more than a few people who benchmark against that as well. I don't think you're the only one by any means.
Well, they don't say it though. That's the difference. The unlikable quality of me is I'm just willing to say everything, but I cover it with a good story. So I got my wife. I mean, I managed to get the best spouse ever. So it's all worked out just fine for me.
That's amazing. And for anybody out there who wants to reach Matthew, again, look at the links. They're going to be above or below this video, and they can email you directly from your website, I believe.
Yes, they can.
And they can find you on social media. This will be posted everywhere. So if you're watching this either on YouTube or socials, you'll be able to see the links. And thank you so much for your time and so much for sharing. It's been wonderful.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.